They say some places are cursed for a reason. Deep in the Blackwood Forest, where sunlight never touches the ground, lies a graveyard that doesn't appear on any map. The locals refuse to speak its name. In 1987, a group of teenagers went looking for it, thinking it was just another urban legend. Only one came back, and he never spoke again. Last month, a hiker's camera was found near the forest edge. The photos on it, they show something that shouldn't exist. Something that's been waiting in those woods for over a century. This is their story. It was supposed to be a normal Saturday morning. Jake Martinez was jogging through the trails near Blackwood Forest, just like he did every weekend. The air was crisp, the birds were singing, and everything felt peaceful. But that peace was about to shatter forever. Jake had been running these trails for 3 years. He knew every turn, every hill, every fallen log. But that morning, something was different. As he rounded a familiar bend, he noticed a narrow path he had never seen before. It was almost hidden behind thick bushes and twisted trees. Strange, he thought. How had he missed this all these years? His curiosity got the better of him. Jake slowed down and stared at the path. It looked old, very old. The trees on either side seemed to lean inward, creating a dark tunnel that disappeared into the woods. A cold breeze suddenly blew past him, even though the rest of the forest was completely still. The birds stopped singing. Everything went quiet. Jake checked his watch. It was only 9 in the morning. He had plenty of time. What harm could a quick look do? He pulled out his phone to check the signal. 2 bars. Good enough. He switched on his camera app and started recording, just in case he found something interesting to show his friends later. The path was narrower than he expected. Branches scratched at his arms as he pushed through. The deeper he went, the darker it got. The trees here were ancient, their bark black and twisted. Moss covered everything, making the ground slippery and damp. The temperature dropped with every step he took. Soon, Jake could see his breath in the air. After about 10 minutes of walking, the path opened up into a small clearing, and that is when Jake saw it. His blood ran cold. His hand started shaking so badly that he almost dropped his phone. There, in front of him, was a graveyard. But this was not like any graveyard he had ever seen. Graves were old, very old. Some of the headstones were cracked and covered in moss. Others had fallen over completely. But what made Jake's heart race was not the age of the graves. It was what was carved into every single headstone. Strange symbols. Symbols he did not recognize. Symbols that seemed to move and shift when he looked directly at them. And in the center of the graveyard stood a massive stone cross, at least 12 feet tall. It was covered in chains, thick rusted chains that wrapped around it dozens of times. Someone had wanted to keep something locked down, something dangerous. Jake took a step back. He should leave. He should run. But he could not look away. Jake stood frozen at the edge of the graveyard, his phone still recording. His rational mind told him to turn around and leave immediately, but something about this place pulled at him. It was like an invisible force was urging him to come closer, to explore, to uncover what had been hidden for so long. He took a deep breath and stepped into the graveyard. The moment his foot crossed the invisible boundary, the temperature dropped even more. It was now so cold that Jake could barely feel his fingers. He looked down at his phone screen. The battery was at 78% just a minute ago. Now it showed 20%. That made no sense. Jake walked slowly between the graves, reading the names on the headstones. Most of them were so worn down that he could barely make out the letters, but the few he could read made his stomach twist. 1800s, 1847, 1852, 1863. These graves were over 150 years old. But something else caught his attention. Every single grave had the same date of death. Different years, but always May 15th. 30 graves, maybe 40. All died on May 15th. Jake felt his skin crawl. What kind of tragedy had happened here? A plague. A massacre. Why had nobody ever talked about this place? He moved closer to the chained cross in the center. As he approached it, he noticed something carved into the stone at the base. Words. Old words in English, barely readable through the layers of dirt and moss. Jake knelt down and used his sleeve to wipe away some of the grime.
Ow!
The words made his heart pound in his chest. Turn back while you still can. They do not rest. They do not forgive. Jake stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a small headstone behind him. His breathing became rapid and shallow. Who had carved this warning? And who were they? The people buried here? That was impossible. Dead people do not hurt anyone. They are just bodies in the ground. Right? A twig snapped somewhere behind him. Jake spun around, his eyes searching the dark tree line. Nothing, just shadows and silence. But he could feel it now, that sensation of being watched, of not being alone. The hair on the back of his neck stood straight up. His phone suddenly beeped. Battery at 5%. Impossible. He had charged it fully before his run. Jake quickly took a few photos of the graveyard, the chained cross, and the warning carved into the stone. He needed evidence. Nobody would believe him without proof. Then his phone died completely. The screen went black. And in that moment of darkness, Jake heard something that made his blood freeze. Whispers. Dozens of whispers coming from all around him. He could not understand the words, but the tone was clear, angry, hungry, warning him. Jake ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life. Jake crashed through the bushes, branches whipping across his face and arms. He did not care about the pain. All he cared about was getting out of those woods as fast as possible. The whispers followed him, growing louder and more urgent. They seemed to be coming from every direction at once, echoing through the trees like a twisted chorus. His lungs burned as he ran down the narrow path. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The path looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, their branches reaching out like twisted fingers trying to grab him. Had he taken a wrong turn? It was impossible. There was only one path in and out. Jake pushed forward, his heart hammering in his chest. Sweat poured down his face despite the freezing cold air. Should have reached the main trail by now. He had only walked for 10 minutes to get to the graveyard. He had been running for at least 15 minutes. Where was the exit? Panic started to set in. Jake stopped running and tried to catch his breath. He looked around frantically. Everything looked the same. Dark trees, thick moss, shadows everywhere. He reached for his phone to use as a compass, then remembered it was dead. Stupid, he should have brought a real compass. He should have told someone where he was going. "Help!" Jake shouted into the woods. His voice echoed back to him, distorted and strange. "Somebody help me." Nothing. No response. No sounds of other hikers or joggers. Just that awful heavy silence. And then the whispers started again. This time they were different. This time Jake could almost understand some of the words. Stay, ... belong here. Cannot leave, ... no. Jake screamed. He started running again, this time in a different direction. Maybe he had gotten turned around. Maybe if he just kept moving, he would find his way out. The forest could not go on forever. There had to be an edge somewhere. But after another 20 minutes of running, Jake found himself back at the graveyard. The same chained cross, same old headstones, the same warning carved in stone. It was impossible. He had run in a straight line. He had not turned back. How could he be here again? Jake fell to his knees, gasping for air. His legs felt like rubber, his vision blurred with tears of frustration and fear. The forest was not letting him leave. Something was keeping him here. Something wanted him to stay in this cursed place forever. And he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the dead leaves behind him. But when Jake turned around to look, there was nobody there, just an empty path in darkness. The footsteps continued, getting closer and closer, but he could see nothing. Jake realized with absolute horror that whatever was walking toward him was invisible. Jake scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around the graveyard. The footsteps were getting closer. Crunch, crunch, slow and steady, like someone taking their time. Like they knew Jake had nowhere to run. His entire body trembled as he backed away toward the chained cross. "Who's there?" His voice cracked. "Show yourself." The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound. Jake could feel it now, a presence standing just a few feet away from him. The air in that spot seemed thicker, colder. He could see his breath swirling in that area, as if something invisible was breathing right in front of him. Then came a voice. It was barely a whisper, raspy and old, like wind blowing through a cave. "You should not have come here, boy." Jake's legs almost gave out. He pressed his back against the cold stone of the chained cross, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't know. I'll leave. I promise I'll never come back. Leave." The voice laughed, a horrible sound that made Jake's skin crawl. "Nobody leaves this place. Not anymore. Since they chained us here." "Who are you?" Jake forced the words out. "What do you want?" The presence moved closer. Jake could feel it now, like ice pressing against his chest.
Else.
The invisible thing was right in front of him, so close he could smell something awful. Rotting earth.
Else.
Decay. Death. "We were the forgotten ones," the voice said. "Buried here in shame, our names erased from history. Our graves hidden from the world. They thought chains could keep us down. Thought we would fade away and be forgotten forever." Jake's mind raced. The chained cross, the hidden graveyard, the strange symbols on the headstones. This was not just an old cemetery. This was a prison. Something had been locked here deliberately, and now Jake had stumbled right into it. "But we grew strong in the darkness," the voice continued. "We fed on the anger and the pain. And now, after all these years, we are hungry for more than just memories." Jake felt something cold touch his shoulder. He screamed and threw himself to the side, rolling across the damp ground. When he looked back, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A handprint. A clear, visible handprint was burned into the stone cross where he had been standing. The stone around it was cracked and blackened, as if touched by intense heat or terrible cold. More footsteps now. Many more, coming from every direction. The graves themselves seemed to pulse and shift. Jake realized with absolute terror that everything buried here was waking up, and they were all coming for him. He had to find a way out. But how do you escape from something you cannot see? How do you fight ghosts that have been growing stronger for over a century? Jake ran blindly through the graveyard, weaving between headstones as the invisible footsteps surrounded him. His mind was spinning. There had to be a way out. There had to be. He refused to believe he would die in this forgotten place, buried alongside whatever evil things were trapped here.
Ouch.
Just as despair began to overwhelm him, Jake spotted something he had not noticed before. At the far edge of the graveyard, barely visible through the twisted trees, was a small wooden shack. It looked ancient and ready to collapse, but there was a faint light glowing in the window. A light meant people. People meant help. Jake sprinted toward the shack, the invisible presences still pursuing him. He could hear their whispers growing angrier, more desperate. "Come back, ... Stay with us, ... You belong here now, ... But Jake did not listen. He focused only on that light, that tiny spark of hope in this dark nightmare. He reached the shack and pounded on the door with both fists. "Help, please, somebody help me." The footsteps were right behind him now. He could feel the cold pressing against his back. "Please." The door suddenly swung open. A hand, wrinkled and spotted with age, grabbed Jake's arm and yanked him inside. The door slammed shut behind him. Jake collapsed on the floor, gasping and shaking. He looked up and saw an old man standing over him. The man was incredibly old, maybe in his 80s or 90s. His face was covered in deep wrinkles, and his eyes were cloudy and gray. He wore dirty overalls and a flannel shirt that looked like it had not been washed in years. In his other hand, he held a shotgun. "Foolish boy," the old man said, his voice rough and tired. "What were you thinking, coming to this place?" "I didn't know," Jake managed to say between gasps. "I was just jogging, and I found a path and ... You followed it like an idiot." The old man walked to the window and peered out through the dirty glass. "They're out there now, angry, hungry. You've stirred them up good." Jake pulled himself to his feet, his legs still trembling. "Who are you? What is this place? What are those things out there?" The old man turned to look at him. His expression was grim. "My name is Thomas Blackwood. I'm the caretaker of this graveyard. Have been for 63 years. And those things out there?" He paused, his face growing even darker. "Those are the condemned. The worst criminals and monsters from the 1800s, murderers, thieves, devil worshippers. They were buried here in secret, far from the town cemetery. The church thought if they chained the graves and hid them in the woods, their evil souls could never escape." Jake felt sick, but they did escape. "No," Thomas said quietly. "They're still trapped here. But their hatred and anger have made them powerful. Powerful enough to hurt anyone who enters this place. Powerful enough to make sure nobody ever leaves." Jake stared at the old man in disbelief. "What do you mean nobody ever leaves? You're here. You left and came back, right?" Thomas Blackwood shook his head slowly. A sad smile crossed his weathered face. "I've never left, boy. Once in 63 years. This graveyard is my prison, just like it's theirs." "That's impossible," Jake said, though his voice lacked conviction. After everything he had just experienced, nothing seemed impossible anymore. Why would you stay here for 63 years? Thomas walked to a small table in the corner and sat down heavily in an old wooden chair. He gestured for Jake to sit across from him. "I didn't have a choice. Let me tell you what happened, and maybe you'll understand what you're up against." Jake sat down, his body still trembling. Outside, he could hear the whispers continuing, circling the shack like wolves waiting for their prey. "It was 1962, Thomas began. I was 23 years old, full of energy and stupidity. I was hiking these woods with my girlfriend, Sarah. We were planning to get married that summer. We had our whole lives ahead of us." His voice cracked slightly. "We found the path just like you did. And just like you, we thought it would be an adventure." Thomas paused, staring at his wrinkled hands. "Sarah went into the graveyard first. I followed her. We were laughing, taking pictures, thinking we had discovered something amazing, but then the sun started to set. We tried to leave, but the forest wouldn't let us. We walked for hours, always ending up back at the graveyard." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The same thing had happened to him, and it was still daylight. When night fell completely, they came out, Thomas continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "The condemned. We could see them in the darkness, twisted shapes, faces full of hatred and hunger, as they surrounded us." Sarah screamed. "I tried to protect her, but..." He stopped, unable to continue for a moment. "What happened to her?" Jake asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. "They took her," Thomas said, tears forming in his cloudy eyes. "Right in front of me. Was pulled into the ground, into one of the graves. I tried to dig her out with my bare hands, but the earth was hard as stone. I could hear her screaming from below, getting fainter and fainter. And then ... silence." Jake felt sick to his stomach. "It's horrible. I'm so sorry." Thomas wiped his eyes roughly. "The condemned made me an offer. They said they would let Sarah rest in peace if I became the caretaker. If I stayed here forever, maintaining the graveyard, keeping people away, I agreed. What choice did I have? I loved her." "So you've been here ever since? For 63 years?" "Every single day," Thomas said. "And now you're here. And I don't know if I can save you." Jake felt panic rising in his chest again. What do you mean you don't know if you can save me? There has to be a way out. You got me into this shack. You protected me from them. Thomas stood up and walked back to the window. Your whispers outside had grown quieter, but they had not stopped. The shack is protected by old symbols and salt lines. Okay? The condemned can't enter here. But that doesn't mean you're safe. They'll wait. They have all the time in the world, and you have maybe a day, 2 at most. 2 days? What happens after 2 days? You'll start to change, Thomas said grimly. This place has rules. Once you've been here long enough, once the forest has claimed you, you become part of it. You become one of them. I've seen it happen before. 2 hikers, curious teenagers, hunters who wandered too far. They all thought they could escape. None of them did. Jake jumped to his feet, knocking over his chair. No way. I'm not staying here. I'm not becoming one of those things. There has to be a way to break the curse, some way to escape. Thomas turned to face him, his expression serious. There is one way, but it's dangerous. More dangerous than anything you've ever done in your life. Tell me, Jake demanded. I'll do whatever it takes. The old man sighed deeply. Source of their power is the chained cross. The chains were blessed by 7 priests back in 1863. They were meant to keep the condemned locked in their graves forever, but something went wrong. Instead of containing them, the chains trapped their spirits here, while their anger and hatred grew stronger. The cross became an anchor, holding them to this world. So we destroy the cross? Jake asked. Not destroy, Thomas corrected. Release. The chains need to be broken in a specific way, with specific words. There's a ritual, I have it written down, passed to me by the last caretaker before me. If done correctly, it will free the spirits and allow them to move on. The graveyard will lose its power. The forest will release anyone trapped here. Jake felt a spark of hope. Let's do it. Let's break the chains right now. Thomas shook his head. It's not that simple. The ritual can only be performed at midnight on May 15th, the anniversary of their deaths. That's when the barrier between worlds is thinnest here. It's when they're most vulnerable. Jake's hope crumbled. May 15th. That's months away. I can't stay here for months. You said I only have 2 days before I change. I know, Thomas said quietly. That's why we have another option, a more dangerous option. We force the ritual to work tonight. But if we fail, if we make even one mistake, they won't just kill us. They'll make us suffer for eternity. They'll trap our souls here forever, just like they did to Sarah and all the others. Jake swallowed hard. What are my odds? Honestly, about 10% chance of success. And if I do nothing, 0% chance. Jake took a deep breath. Then I guess we're doing the ritual. Thomas nodded slowly, respect showing in his tired eyes. You've got courage, boy. That's good. You'll need every bit of it. He walked to a dusty shelf and pulled down an old leather journal. The pages were yellow and fragile, covered in faded handwriting. This belonged to the first caretaker, Father Michael O'Brien, Thomas explained, carefully opening the journal. He was one of the 7 priests who performed the original binding ritual in 1863. He stayed behind to watch over the graves, to make sure the condemned never escaped. He wrote down everything. The history, the ritual, the mistakes they made. Jake moved closer to look at the journal. The handwriting was difficult to read, full of old-fashioned words and religious references, but he could make out some of it. Names of the condemned. Their crimes. Instructions for the ritual written in Latin and English. We'll need several things, Thomas said, flipping through the pages. Salt, blessed water, iron nails, and 7 black candles. I have most of that here. I've been collecting supplies for years, hoping maybe one day I'd have the courage to try this myself. Why didn't you? Jake asked. Thomas looked away. Fear, plain and simple. I'm an old man now. I've lived here so long that I am not even sure what I'd do if I was free. And I was afraid of failing, afraid of making things worse. But you've given me a reason to try. You remind me of myself when I was young. You deserve a chance at life. Jake felt a lump in his throat. We'll both make it out, I promise. Thomas gave him a sad smile, but said nothing. He gathered supplies from various corners of the shack. A bag of salt, a clay bottle of water with a cross carved into it, a handful of old iron nails, rusted but still strong, 7 black candles that looked like they had never been lit. The hardest part will be getting to the cross, Thomas said as he packed everything into a worn canvas bag. The condemned will know what we're trying to do the moment we step outside. They'll throw everything they have at us. We'll see things, hear things designed to break our minds and our will. What kind of things? Jake asked nervously. Your worst fears? Your deepest regrets? They'll use your own memories against you. They'll show you people you love being hurt. They'll make you doubt reality itself. Some people go mad before they even reach the cross. Jake tried to steady his breathing. How do we fight that? We don't fight it, Thomas said. We endure it. We hold on to one single truth no matter what we see or hear. Keep moving forward. The ritual must be completed. That's all that matters. Thomas pulled out a pocket watch from his overalls. It's 4 in the afternoon now. We should wait until sunset. The condemned are stronger in darkness, but there's something else we need. We need to visit the graves of the 7 priests who performed the original ritual. Their bones hold power that can help us. Jake felt his stomach turn. Their graves. Are they buried here too? Just outside the main graveyard in a small clearing to the east. They chose to be buried near their work, to watch over the condemned even in death. We'll need to take something from each grave, small bone fragment. It will strengthen the ritual. You want us to dig up graves and steal bones from dead priests? Jake could not believe what he was hearing. Thomas fixed him with a serious stare. I want us to survive, and this is the only way. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Thomas and Jake prepared to leave the safety of the shack. Thomas handed Jake a small leather pouch filled with salt. Keep this with you at all times, the old man instructed. If anything gets too close, throw the salt at it. It won't kill them, but it will hurt them enough to buy you a few seconds. Sometimes a few seconds is all you need. Jake tied the pouch to his belt. His hands were still shaking, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic would get him killed. He needed to focus, to think clearly. Are you sure about this, Thomas? Maybe we should wait until morning. Morning won't come for us if we wait, Thomas said. I can feel it. The condemned know you're here. They're gathering their strength. If we don't act tonight, by tomorrow you'll be too weak to resist them. Trust me on this. Thomas opened the door slowly. The temperature had dropped dramatically. Their breath came out in thick clouds of vapor. The graveyard looked different now in the fading light. The shadows were deeper, darker. The headstones seemed to lean toward them, as if watching. Stay close to me, Thomas whispered. Don't respond to anything you hear. Don't look directly at anything that moves. And whatever you do, don't stop walking. They stepped out of the shack together.
The whispers started again.
But this time, Jake could understand them clearly. Jake, Jake Martinez. We've been waiting for you, We know your secrets. We know what you did. Jake's blood ran cold. How did they know his name? He had not told them anything. Remember, Thomas said firmly, they're trying to get inside your head. Ignore them. They walked east, away from the main graveyard. The path was barely visible, overgrown with thorny bushes and twisted roots. Jake kept his eyes on Thomas's back, trying not to look at the shapes moving in his peripheral vision. Dark figures darting between trees, faces appearing in the bark, hands reaching up from the ground. After 10 minutes of walking, they reached a small clearing. 7 simple stone markers stood in a circle. Unlike the graves in the main cemetery, these were well maintained. The grass around them was neatly trimmed. Fresh flowers, somehow still alive despite the cold, decorated each marker. "You've been taking care of these graves?" Jake asked. Namas nodded. "Every week for 63 years, it's the least I could do. These men sacrificed their eternal rest to contain evil. They deserve respect." Jake read the names on the markers. Father Michael O'Brien, Father James Sullivan, Father Patrick Murphy, Father William Hayes, Father Thomas Brennan, Father Robert Kelly, Father John McCarthy. All died on May 15th, 1863. All died on the same day they performed the binding ritual. "They died during the ritual?" Jake asked, shocked. "The ritual required a sacrifice," Thomas explained quietly. "They knew they wouldn't survive it, but they did it anyway to protect the town, to protect innocent people from the monsters buried here. That's true courage, boy. That's what heroes look like." Jake felt a new respect for these 7 priests. They had given everything to stop evil. Now he and Thomas were about to disturb their rest. Will they forgive us for what we're about to do? Thomas pulled a small shovel from his bag. "I pray they will. I pray they understand we have no choice." He handed Jake the shovel. "We need to dig carefully. We only need a small piece from each grave. A finger bone will be enough." Jake took the shovel with trembling hands. He had never dug up a grave before. He had never even been to a funeral. And now he was about to desecrate the resting place of 7 holy men. He pushed the shovel into the earth of Father O'Brien's grave. The moment the blade broke the soil, every bird in the forest started screaming at once. The screaming of the birds was deafening. Jake covered his ears, but it did not help. The sound seemed to come from inside his head, piercing through his skull like needles. Thomas grabbed his shoulder and shouted something, but Jake could not hear the words over the terrible noise. Then, as suddenly as it started, the screaming stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Not a single sound in the entire forest. No wind. No insects. Nothing. Just dead, heavy silence pressing down on them from all sides. "Keep digging," Thomas urged. "We don't have much time." Jake forced himself to continue. The soil was soft, easier to dig than he expected. After only a few minutes, his shovel hit something solid. Wood, the coffin. Jake's heart pounded as he cleared away more dirt, exposing the old wooden surface. The wood was rotted and fragile. Thomas knelt beside the hole and carefully pulled away a section of the coffin lid. It crumbled in his hands like paper. Inside, Jake could see bones wrapped in the remains of black priest robes. Father O'Brien's skeleton was remarkably preserved, considering it had been buried for over 160 years. "Forgive us, Father," Thomas whispered. He reached in and gently removed a small bone from the skeleton's hand. A finger bone, just as he had said. As soon as Thomas touched it, the bone began to glow with a faint blue light. Jake stared in amazement. "It's glowing." "The blessing is still active," Thomas said with relief. "Even after all these years, the holy power remains. This is good. This means we have a chance." He carefully placed the bone in a small cloth bag. They moved to the next grave, Father Sullivan and Father Murphy. Each time, the process was the same. Dig carefully, open the coffin, take a finger bone, apologize, and move on. Oh! Each bone glowed with that same blue light when removed. Jake started to feel a strange sense of hope. Maybe this would actually work. But when they reached the 5th grave, Father Brennan's resting place, something went wrong. As Jake's shovel broke through the soil, he heard a voice, not a whisper like the condemned. A clear, strong voice that seemed to come from the grave itself. "Stop." Jake froze. Thomas heard it too. They looked at each other, uncertain what to do. "Stop this foolishness," the voice said again. "You do not understand what you are doing. You do not know the true cost of the ritual." "Father Brennan," Thomas called out, his voice shaking. "Is that you?" "I am what remains of him," the voice answered. "A fragment of his soul bound to this place just like the condemned. We failed, Thomas Blackwood. We failed to contain them properly. And now, you want to make the same mistake we made." Jake found his voice. "What mistake? What are you talking about? Ritual does not free them," Father Brennan's spirit said. "It releases them into the world. All of them. The most evil souls ever buried in this county, free to walk among the living again. We tried to send them to their final judgment, but we were not strong enough. We bound them here instead, hoping future generations would find a better way. But there is no better way. They must stay chained forever, or everyone will suffer." Thomas looked devastated. "Then there's no escape. No way to leave this place." "There is one way," the voice said sadly. "But it requires a sacrifice. It always requires a sacrifice. One pure soul must take our place. One person must willingly become the eternal guardian, binding themselves to this graveyard forever. Only then will the others be free to leave." Jake felt like he had been punched in the stomach. One of them would have to stay behind. One of them would have to become the new caretaker, trapped here for the rest of their life and beyond. "No," Jake said firmly. "There has to be another way." "There is no other way," Father Brennan replied. "This is the terrible truth we discovered too late. Evil this strong cannot be destroyed. It can only be contained. And containment requires a guardian." The voice faded away, leaving Jake and Thomas standing in horrified silence. Jake and Thomas stood in the clearing, surrounded by the open graves of the priests. The glowing bones in Thomas's bag cast eerie blue shadows across their faces. The weight of Father Brennan's words hung heavy in the air between them. "He's lying," Jake said, though his voice lacked conviction. "He has to be lying. There has to be another way." Thomas sat down heavily on a nearby stone, suddenly looking every bit of his 86 years. "He's not lying, boy. I've always known, deep down. I've always suspected the truth. Why else would I have stayed here for 63 years? Why else would every caretaker before me have stayed until death? We weren't just bound by the deal with the condemned, we were bound by duty, by sacrifice." "That's not fair," Jake said angrily. "You didn't choose this. You were forced into it. And I definitely didn't choose to stumble into this nightmare. We shouldn't have to sacrifice our lives for mistakes made over a century ago." "Fair," Thomas laughed bitterly. "Life isn't fair, Jake. I learned that the day Sarah was pulled into the ground. But sometimes, unfair situations still require us to make hard choices. Sometimes being a good person means sacrificing yourself so others can live." Jake paced back and forth, his mind racing. There has to be something we're missing. Some loophole. Some other option. He stopped suddenly. "Wait, Father Brennan said one pure soul must become the guardian. What does that even mean? Pure soul?" Thomas thought for a moment. "Someone innocent. Someone who hasn't committed terrible sins. Someone worthy of bearing such a burden? Then it should be me," Jake said quickly. "You've already given 63 years to this place. You've suffered enough. Let me take your place. Let me become the new caretaker so you can finally leave." Thomas looked at him with tears in his old eyes. "That's noble of you, boy. Truly. But you have your whole life ahead of you. You're what, 25? 26? You have dreams, goals, people who love you. I'm an old man. I have nothing left. No family, no friends. Everyone I ever knew is dead. My life ended the day Sarah died." "That's exactly why you should leave," Jake argued. "You deserve to spend whatever years you have left in freedom. You've earned it." They were interrupted by a sound that made both of them turn toward the main graveyard. A grinding noise like stone scraping against stone. And then they saw it. The chained cross in the center of the graveyard was moving, Chains were rattling violently, and the ground around the cross was beginning to crack and split open. "What's happening?" Jake asked in alarm. Thomas's face went pale. "They know. The condemned know. We're disturbing the priests' graves. They know we're planning something. You're breaking free early." Dark shapes began rising from the cracks in the ground. Dozens of them. More than Jake had seen before. Shadow figures with glowing red eyes, their forms twisted and wrong. They moved toward the clearing where Jake and Thomas stood, slow but purposeful. "We have to decide now," Thomas said urgently. "Do we run back to the shack and hope we can hold out? Do we try the ritual anyway and risk releasing them into the world? Or does one of us accept the role of guardian?" Jake looked at the approaching shadows, then at Thomas, then at the glowing bones in the bag. Every option seemed hopeless. Every path led to suffering. "How do you choose between impossible choices?" "I need more time to think," Jake said desperately. "Time is the one thing we don't have," Thomas replied. The shadows were less than 50 feet away now, and getting closer. Thomas grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him toward the path back to the shack. "Move now."
Down.
They ran, but the shadows were faster than before. They swirled around Jake and Thomas like a dark tornado, cutting off their escape route. Jake threw salt from his pouch at the nearest shadow, shrieked and recoiled, smoke rising from where the salt touched it. But 3 more shadows immediately took its place. "They're everywhere," Jake shouted. One of the shadows lunged at Thomas, its form solidifying into something almost human. Jake could see its face now, a woman with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted in rage. She wore a tattered dress from the 1800s covered in dirt and blood. Her fingers ended in long black claws. "Thomas Blackwood," she hissed, "you've kept us prisoner long enough. Tonight we finally take our revenge." Thomas pulled out a small metal cross from his pocket and held it up. The shadow woman screamed and backed away, but she did not disappear. "The cross won't hold us much longer, old man. Our power grows with every passing moment. Soon, not even your holy symbols will stop us." More shadows closed in. Jake could see their faces now, too. Men with scarred faces and murderous eyes. Children with twisted smiles that were wrong, all wrong. An old man with a noose around his neck, his head bent at an unnatural angle. These were the condemned. The murderers, the thieves, the evil ones buried in shame. And they were hungry. "We need to get to the cross," Thomas yelled. "It's our only chance. We finish the ritual now, or we die trying." Jake nodded. They changed direction, running straight toward the chained cross in the center of the graveyard. The shadows tried to block their path, but Thomas swung his shotgun like a club, the metal barrel passing through the dark forms and disrupting them temporarily. They reached the cross, both gasping for breath. Thomas quickly pulled out the bones of the 7 priests and arranged them in a circle around the base of the cross. Each bone glowed brighter as it touched the ground, creating a barrier of blue light that pushed the shadows back several feet. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they break through," Thomas said. He pulled out Father O'Brien's journal and flipped to the ritual page. "I'll read the incantation. You need to break the chains. Use these." He handed Jake a hammer and one of the iron nails. "Break the chains?" "But Father Brennan said that would release them." "We don't have a choice anymore," Thomas said grimly. "They're already breaking free. At least if we complete the ritual, we might be able to control how they're released. We might be able to send them to their final judgment instead of letting them escape into the world." Jake looked at the massive chains wrapped around the cross. They were thick and heavy, covered in rust and strange symbols. "Where do I strike?" Thomas pointed to a specific link in the chain. That's the weakest point." "But Jake, you need to understand something. The moment you break that chain, everything changes. The barrier between our world and theirs will collapse. We'll be completely vulnerable." "Then you better read that incantation fast," Jake said. He raised the hammer, positioned the iron nail against the chain link, and took a deep breath. The shadows sensed what was about to happen. They began screaming all at once, a sound so terrible that Jake's ears felt like they were bleeding. The ground shook violently. The headstones began to crack and topple. The entire graveyard was falling apart around them. "Do it," Thomas shouted. Jake brought the hammer down with all his strength. The iron nail pierced the chain link. There was a sound like thunder and a blinding flash of light. The chain shattered into 1,000 pieces, fragments flying in every direction. And then the screaming stopped. Everything went silent. The shadows froze in place. Even the wind died completely. For a moment, nothing happened. Jake and Thomas looked at each other, confused. Had it worked? Then the ground beneath the cross began to open up. A massive hole appeared, growing wider and wider, revealing a darkness so deep and absolute that looking at it hurt Jake's eyes. And from that darkness came a voice. Not the whispers of the condemned, but something else. Something ancient and powerful and absolutely terrifying. Who dares to break the seal? The voice that came from the darkness was not human. It was deep and layered, as if 1,000 voices were speaking at once. The sound vibrated through Jake's bones, making his teeth ache and his vision blur. He stumbled backward, nearly falling into one of the open graves. Thomas stood frozen, his face white as snow. "This isn't right," he whispered. "This wasn't in the journal. There was nothing about something else being down there." The hole continued to expand, swallowing the chained cross completely. The fragments of broken chain fell into the darkness and disappeared without a sound. The glowing bones of the 7 priests flickered, their blue light growing dim. "Answer me," the voice demanded. "Who breaks the seal of the 7? Who disturbs my rest?" Jake found his voice, though it came out weak and trembling. "We didn't know. We were trying to free ourselves from the condemned. We were trying to escape." A sound like laughter echoed from the pit, but it was not humorous. It was cruel and mocking. "Escape, foolish mortals. There is no escape from this place. There never was. The priests did not bind the condemned here. They bound me. And the condemned were my jailers, my prison guards, cursed to watch over me for eternity." Thomas dropped the journal, his hands shaking. "That's impossible. Father O'Brien wrote that they were containing evil criminals. He wrote that they were protecting the town. They lied," the voice said. "Or perhaps they simply did not understand what they were truly doing. I am Malthus, servant of darkness, collector of souls. In 1863, I walked the earth in physical form, taking what I pleased, destroying what I wished. The 7 priests trapped me here with their ritual, but they could not destroy me. So they created the condemned, binding the souls of the dead to this graveyard, forcing them to serve as my eternal wardens." Jake's mind reeled. Everything they thought they knew was wrong. The condemned were not the ultimate evil. They were prisoners too, forced to guard something much worse. "The condemned were murderers and criminals when they lived," Malface continued. "But in death they were given a choice: to serve as guardians and eventually find redemption, or face eternal damnation. They chose servitude. For over 1.5 centuries, they have kept me contained. And you, in your ignorance and desperation, have broken their chains. You have freed me." A form began to rise from the pit. At first it was just shadow and smoke, but slowly it took shape. Tall, impossibly tall, 12 feet high, maybe more. It had the shape of a man, but wrong in every way. It's too many joints in its arms and legs. Fingers that were too long, ending in claws like curved knives. Its head was elongated, with no face except for 2 eyes that burned like hot coals. The condemned shadows, which had been frozen in place, suddenly began moving again. But they were not attacking anymore. They were backing away, cowering in fear of the thing rising before them. "Please," one of them whispered. "Please, not again. We served our sentence. We kept watch. This is not fair." Malthus looked at them with those burning eyes. Fair? You speak to me of fairness? You who murdered children? You who burned churches? You who committed acts so vile that your own families erased your names from history? The demon's voice was filled with rage. You will serve me still, but this time not as jailers. This time as soldiers. The condemned began to change. Their shadow forms solidified, becoming more physical, more real. Their features became clearer, more monstrous. They grew larger, stronger. The fear in their eyes was replaced with something else. Hunger, bloodlust, evil. Thomas grabbed Jake's arm. "Run," he said simply. "Run, and don't look back." But where could they run? The forest had trapped them here. And now, with Malthus free, there was nowhere safe, nowhere to hide. Jake looked at the old man. "What have we done?" "We've doomed the world," Thomas replied. Malthus stretched its impossibly long arms, as if testing its physical form after centuries of imprisonment. The ground cracked beneath its feet with each movement. The trees around the graveyard began to wither and die, their leaves turning black and falling like ashes. "I have waited so long for this moment," the demon said. "So long trapped in darkness, feeding only on the hatred and despair of my jailers. But now I am free. Now I can walk the earth again. I will feast on human souls. I will turn this world into a garden of suffering." Jake's mind raced frantically. There had to be a way to stop this. There had to be something they could do. He looked at Thomas, who was still holding Father O'Brien's journal. The journal. There must be something in there. Some way to reverse the ritual, to put it back in the pit. Thomas quickly flipped through the pages, his hands shaking so badly he could barely turn them. There's nothing. Nothing about a demon. Nothing about reversing the seal. Father O'Brien never knew the truth. He died thinking he had imprisoned criminals. Not that he had created a prison for something far worse. One of the condemned, now transformed into a more monstrous form, approached them. It was the woman in the tattered dress that Jake had seen earlier, but she looked different now. Her eyes glowed red like Malthus's eyes. Her claws were longer, sharper. "Master," she said to the demon, "what shall we do with these two? They freed you. Do they deserve a reward or punishment?" Malthus turned its burning gaze toward Jake and Thomas. "They freed me by accident, out of desperation. There is no honor in that. It's no loyalty. They would imprison me again if they could. They're simply more food for my army." The transformed condemned began to surround them. 20 of them, maybe more. All changed into nightmare creatures, all serving the demon now. Jake pulled out his pouch of salt, but only a handful remained. Not nearly enough to fight them all. "Wait," Thomas said suddenly, his voice stronger than before. He had stopped on a page in the journal, his eyes scanning the text rapidly. "Jake, listen to me carefully. There might be a way." "What did you find?" "Father O'Brien writes about the original ritual. The 7 priests didn't just use holy water and prayers. They used a sacrifice. They sacrificed themselves. All 7 of them gave their lives willingly to create the seal. That's why their bones still hold power. That's why they're glowing." Jake understood immediately where Thomas was going with this. "You think if we sacrifice ourselves, we can create a new seal? We can trap Malthus again? It's not just us," Thomas said, looking at the glowing bones arranged in a circle. "We need 7. 7 willing sacrifices to recreate the seal. 7 pure souls to bind the demon back into the darkness." "But there's only 2 of us," Jake protested. "Where are we going to find 5 more people willing to die?" Thomas looked at the condemned surrounding them. "Not people. Souls. We need 7 souls willing to give up their existence completely. To be erased from reality itself in exchange for sealing the demon." One of the condemned, an old man with the noose around his neck, stepped forward. "Are you saying we could end this? Truly end this? No more servitude? No more suffering? Just peace, nothingness?" "Yes," Thomas said. "But it means complete destruction. Your souls would be consumed in the sealing. You would not go to heaven or hell. You would simply cease to exist. The old man looked at the other condemned. Something passed between them. An understanding. Hope. We have been prisoners for over 160 years, he said. We have watched over evil, been transformed by it, suffered because of it. Nothingness sounds like paradise compared to this. Another condemned stepped forward. Then another, and another. 5 of them total, standing with Jake and Thomas. That's only 7 counting us, Jake said. Will it be enough? Thomas looked at the journal again. It has to be. 7 is the sacred number. 7 priests created the seal. 7 souls can recreate it. But we have to act now before Malphus realizes what we're planning. Malphus was distracted, examining the graveyard, testing its power. The demon raised one clawed hand and a tree 50 feet away exploded into splinters. It laughed with pleasure at its own strength. How do we do it? Jake asked quietly. Thomas pointed to the pit where the demon had emerged. We jump. All 7 of us together. As we fall, we recite the binding words. A willing sacrifice will fuel the seal. The demon will be pulled back down with us. Jake felt his stomach drop. He was being asked to kill himself. To jump into an endless darkness and never return. He thought about his family, his friends, his dreams for the future. Everything he would be giving up. But then he thought about what would happen if Malphaeus remained free. How many people would die? Much suffering would the demon cause. Could he really live with himself knowing he had a chance to stop it and chose not to? I'll do it, Jake said. I'll make the sacrifice. Thomas placed a weathered hand on Jake's shoulder. You're a brave man, Jake Martinez. Braver than I ever was. If there's an afterlife, I hope we meet there as friends. I hope so too, Jake replied, his voice steady, despite the fear coursing through him. The 5 condemned who had volunteered stood in a circle with Jake and Thomas. The old man with the noose spoke first. My name was Henry Walsh. I killed 3 men in a gambling dispute in 1847. I have regretted it every day since, living and dead. Today, I finally make amends. The woman in the tattered dress spoke next. I was Margaret Thorne. I poisoned my husband and his brother for their inheritance in 1852. I have lived in shame and torment. Today, I seek forgiveness through sacrifice. One by one, the others shared their names and crimes. Robert Finch, who burned down a church with people inside. Samuel Cross, who murdered a family of travelers on the road. Elizabeth Moore, who drowned her own children in madness. Each had committed terrible acts in life. Each had suffered for over a century. And now, each was willing to give up everything to stop a greater evil. Malphus suddenly turned toward them, its burning eyes narrowing. What are you doing? Why do you gather in a circle? Why do you speak your true names? Now, Thomas shouted. Everyone grab hands. Recite the words with me. Thomas opened the journal and began reading in Latin. The words were ancient and powerful. Jake did not understand them, but he felt their weight, their importance. The 5 condemned and Thomas all spoke together, their voices rising in unison. Malphus roared in rage. No, I will not be imprisoned again. I will not. The demon charged toward them, moving impossibly fast. The remaining condemned tried to stop their master, but Malphus swept them aside like leaves in a storm. The ground beneath the circle began to glow with the same blue light as the priest's bones. The light grew brighter and brighter, forming a column that shot up into the darkening sky. The pit in the center of the graveyard began pulling at everything around it, creating a powerful suction like a black hole. Keep speaking, Thomas yelled over the roar of wind and energy. Don't stop until we're in the pit. Jake held tight to Thomas's hand on one side, and Henry Walsh's cold, ghostly hand on the other. Together, the 7 of them began walking toward the pit. Each step was harder than the last. The pull was incredible, but they needed to enter willingly. That was the key to the sacrifice. Malphus reached them just as they stood at the edge. His massive clawed hand grabbed for Thomas, trying to separate them, to break the circle. But Thomas held firm. "For Sarah," he shouted. "For everyone who suffered because I was too afraid to act. For redemption," the condemned shouted together. "For the world," Jake added. And then they jumped. All 7 of them, still holding hands, still reciting the Latin words, fell into the darkness. Malthus, caught in the circle, was pulled down with them. The demon's screams echoed through the forest, a sound of pure rage and hatred. As Jake fell through the endless darkness, he felt strange. There was no fear anymore, no regret, just peace. He had made a choice. He had done something that mattered. He had saved lives, even if it cost him his own. The blue light from the circle intensified, becoming blinding. Jake could feel himself fading, dissolving, becoming part of the seal itself. His last thought was of his mother. He hoped she would understand. He hoped she would be proud. Then ... nothing. The graveyard was silent. The pit sealed itself, the ground closing over it as if it had never existed. The chained cross reappeared, whole and unbroken, standing tall in the center. The remaining condemned, those who had not volunteered, found themselves changed back to their shadow forms. But something was different. They felt lighter. The weight of their evil seemed lessened. As dawn broke over Blackwood Forest, a strange thing happened. The path that led to the secret graveyard vanished. The trees grew together, blocking any entrance. The forest itself seemed to shift and change, making the graveyard impossible to find. 7 souls had succeeded. Malthus was sealed once more, but this time the seal was different, stronger. Born not from religious obligation, but from true sacrifice and redemption. In town, Jake's mother would wake up that morning wondering why her son had not called her. She would report him missing. Search parties would comb the forest for weeks. They would find nothing. No body, no clues. Just stories from locals about strange lights in the woods the night before, and an eerie silence that had fallen over Blackwood Forest. Jake Martinez would become another missing person, another unsolved mystery. But somewhere, in a place beyond death and darkness, 7 souls rested together. Heroes who gave everything to save a world that would never know their names. Detective Sarah Chen stood at the edge of Blackwood Forest, staring at the thick wall of trees. She had been assigned to Jake Martinez's missing person case 6 months ago, and it had haunted her ever since. 27 missing person reports in the last 50 years, all connected to this forest. And not a single body had ever been found. "You shouldn't waste your time here, Detective," old Sheriff Morrison said behind her. He was retiring next week after 40 years of service. "Nobody who goes into those deep woods ever comes back. That's just how it is." "That's not an acceptable answer," Sarah replied firmly. 27 people don't just vanish into thin air. There has to be an explanation. A serial killer, a dangerous animal, underground caves that people fall into. Something. Sheriff Morrison shook his head. "I've heard all the theories. Investigated most of them myself when I was younger. There's nothing to find. The forest just takes people sometimes. Always has. My grandfather told me stories about it happening back in his day too." Sarah pulled out her tablet and showed him the data she had compiled. "Look at this pattern. Most disappearances happen in early May or late October, and they always occur within a 3-mile radius of this specific area." She pointed to a spot on the digital map. "There's something in there. I know it. Don't even think about it," Morrison warned. "I've lost 3 deputies over the years to that curiosity. Good people who thought they could solve the mystery, yet they went in and never came back." But Sarah was already planning her expedition. She had GPS trackers, satellite phones, emergency beacons, and a camera crew from a true crime documentary series willing to follow her. If something was in those woods, she was going to find it and expose it to the world. 3 days later, Sarah and her team entered Blackwood Forest. They were equipped with the latest technology, confident that nothing could stop them. They hiked for hours, searching for any sign of the missing people. But the forest seemed normal. Its trees, rocks, and wildlife. As the sun began to set, Sarah's lead cameraman, Marcus, pointed his camera at something unusual. "Hey, detective, look at this. These trees are arranged in a perfect circle. It's not natural." Sarah examined the area. Marcus was right. 12 ancient trees formed a perfect circle about 30 feet in diameter. The grass inside the circle was dead, while everything outside was green and healthy. "This is it," she said excitedly. "This has to be connected to the disappearances." She stepped into the circle. The temperature immediately dropped 20 degrees. Her breath came out in visible puffs of vapor, even though it was a warm September evening. The GPS on her watch began spinning wildly, unable to lock onto any satellites. "Detective, maybe we should come back tomorrow with more equipment," Marcus suggested nervously. His camera was malfunctioning, the screen flickering with static. But Sarah was not listening. She was looking at the ground in the center of the circle. There, barely visible beneath a thin layer of dirt and dead leaves, was a stone marker. She knelt down and brushed away the debris. Words were carved into the stone. Old words. A warning. "Here lies the seal of 7. Disturb not their rest. Honor their sacrifice." Sarah frowned. Seal of 7. What does that mean? She pulled out a small shovel from her backpack. "Help me clear this area. I want to see what else is written here." Marcus set down his camera, which had completely stopped working. "I really don't think this is a good idea, detective." But Sarah was already digging. The other team members, 3 in total, reluctantly joined her. As they cleared away more dirt, they discovered that the stone marker was actually the tip of something much larger. A massive stone slab buried just beneath the surface, covered in strange symbols and Latin words. And then Sarah's shovel hit something that made a hollow sound. Not stone, not earth, something else. She cleared away more dirt and gasped. There was a seam in the slab, a crack that ran across the entire surface. And from that crack, cold air was flowing up, carrying with it a smell that made everyone gag. The smell of death, smell of decay, and something else. Something ancient and wrong. "We need to open it," Sarah said, her detective instincts overriding her fear. "There might be bodies down there. Evidence. Answers." "Or we could leave and call for backup," Marcus pleaded. "With proper equipment and more people?" But Sarah was not leaving. Not when she was so close to solving the mystery. She wedged her shovel into the crack and pushed down with all her weight. The slab shifted slightly. "Help me. All of you can move it." The team, against their better judgment, joined her. Together, they pushed and pried at the slab. It moved inch by inch, the crack growing wider. The cold air rushing up became a wind. And from below, they heard something that made their blood freeze. Whispers. Dozens of whispers coming from the darkness below. "Stop!" Marcus suddenly shouted, dropping his end of the shovel. "Did you hear that? There's something down there? Something alive?" Sarah paused, listening. The whispers were clear now, though she could not understand the words. They sounded desperate, angry, warning. "It's probably just wind moving through underground chambers," she said, trying to convince herself as much as her team. "Or animals that made a den below." But deep down, she knew it was neither of those things. One of the other team members, a young woman named Kelly, backed away from the slab. "I'm done. It's crazy. We should seal this back up and leave now." "We're so close," Sarah insisted. "One more push, and we can see what's down there." She positioned herself at the crack again. "Please. I need to know what happened to those people. Need to give their families closure." Marcus looked at Kelly, then at the other team member, a man named Derek. They were all scared, but they also understood Sarah's desperation. I had dedicated months to this case. and they had come this far already. One more push, Marcus agreed reluctantly. But if we see anything dangerous, we run. Deal. Deal, Sarah said. They all grabbed the edge of the slab and heaved with all their strength. The stone moved more easily this time, sliding to the side with a grinding sound. The crack became a gap, then a hole big enough to see through. Cold air rushed up with such force that it knocked Kelly backward. Sarah pulled out her flashlight and shined it into the hole. The beam disappeared into darkness so deep it seemed to swallow the light. She could not see the bottom. The hole went down at least 50 feet, maybe more. There's a ladder, Derek observed, pointing to iron rungs embedded in the stone wall of the shaft. Someone built this intentionally. This isn't natural. Sarah's heart raced with excitement. This is it. This is what I've been looking for. There's something down there. Maybe a bunker. Maybe a cave system where people got trapped. She began lowering herself toward the ladder. You're not seriously going down there, Kelly said in disbelief. You have to. Stay here and keep watch. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, call for help. Sarah grabbed the first rung of the ladder. The metal was ice cold, so cold it burned her hand. But she did not stop. She began climbing down into the darkness. Her flashlight beam bounced off the stone walls, showing symbols carved into every surface. The same strange symbols that had been on the headstones Jake had photographed. The same symbols that appeared in the old reports about Blackwood Forest. As Sarah descended, the whispers grew louder. She could almost make out words now. Turn back, ... mistake, sealed for a reason, ... But she ignored them. She had come too far to stop now. After what felt like forever, her foot touched solid ground. She was in some kind of chamber. Her flashlight revealed stone walls, a dirt floor, and 7 stone pillars arranged in a circle. Each pillar had a name carved into it. The first one she saw made her blood run cold. Jake Martinez. Sarah moved to the next pillar. Thomas Blackwood, then the others. Henry Walsh, Margaret Thorne, Robert Finch, Samuel Cross, Elizabeth Moore. 7 names, 7 pillars. This was a tomb. But where were the bodies? The whispers suddenly stopped. The silence was absolute. And then Sarah heard a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was not the whispers from before. This voice was different, deeper, more powerful, more terrifying. Finally, after 6 months of waiting, another fool has opened the seal. Sarah spun around, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. But there was nothing there, just shadows and stone. "Who's there?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Show yourself." A laugh echoed through the chamber. "I am already showing myself, Detective Chen. I am the darkness around you. I am the cold that freezes your breath. I am Malphus, and you have freed me once again." Sarah's flashlight began to flicker. The batteries were dying impossibly fast. That's impossible. Demons aren't real. "This is just someone trying to scare me, is it?" the voice asked. "Then explain the photographs on Jake Martinez's phone. Explain the 27 disappearances. Explain why you can feel my presence right now, pressing against your mind, reading your thoughts, tasting your fears." The flashlight went out completely. Sarah was plunged into absolute darkness. She could not see her hand in front of her face. Panic began to set in. She turned to climb back up the ladder, but she could not find it. The chamber seemed to have changed. It's grown larger. Or maybe she was lost. "The 7 souls sacrificed themselves to seal me away," Malthus continued. "They created a prison with their willing deaths. But seals can be broken. Prisons can be opened. And you, in your arrogance and curiosity, have done exactly that." Sarah fumbled in her pocket for her phone. Her fingers found it, and she pulled it out, using the screen light to see. The chamber was different now, larger, and the 7 pillars were cracking, splitting apart. Dark shapes were emerging from each pillar. Shadow forms that looked almost human but twisted and wrong. "The condemned return," Malphus said with satisfaction. "And this time, there will be no seal. This time, no heroes will sacrifice themselves. This time, the world will burn." Sarah finally found the ladder and began climbing frantically. But she only made it up a few rungs before something grabbed her ankle. A cold, impossibly strong hand pulled her back down. She screamed, her phone flying from her hand and clattering to the floor below. Above, Marcus, Kelly, and Derek heard the scream. They looked at each other in terror. "We have to help her," Derek said. But before they could move, something began climbing up the ladder. Something dark. Something evil. It was moving fast. Marcus grabbed Kelly and Derek. "Run! Get to the vehicles now!" They did not need to be told twice. All three sprinted through the forest as fast as their legs could carry them. Behind them, they heard Sarah's screams growing fainter, more desperate, and then suddenly silent. They crashed through bushes and jumped over fallen logs, their lungs burning. Marcus risked a glance backward and immediately wished he had not. Dark shapes were pouring out of the stone circle like smoke from a chimney. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They spread through the trees, moving in unnatural ways. Sometimes crawling on all fours, sometimes gliding above the ground. "Don't look back," Marcus yelled. "Just keep running." They reached their vehicles parked at the forest edge. Kelly fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice. Finally, she got the door open and jumped inside. Derek dove into the passenger seat. Marcus ran to his own truck, but before he could reach it, one of the shadow creatures caught up to him. It wrapped around him like living smoke, impossibly cold. Marcus felt his energy draining away, his warmth being sucked out of his body. He collapsed to his knees, unable to move. The last thing he saw was Kelly's car speeding away down the road, leaving him behind. Inside Kelly's car, Derek was calling 911 on his phone. "Hello? We need help. Blackwood Forest, the north entrance. Our team was attacked. Detective Chen is still down there. Marcus is." He looked in the rearview mirror and saw Marcus lying motionless on the ground, covered in shadow. "Oh God. Oh God." "Sir, please calm down," the 911 operator said. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" "We opened something, some kind of sealed chamber. There were things inside, dark things. They're coming out. They're spreading through the forest." Derek knew he sounded crazy, but he did not care. "You need to evacuate the town. Everyone needs to get out of here now. Sir, I'm sending units to your location. Stay on the line with me." But Kelly was not waiting for police. She drove straight through town, honking her horn, screaming out the window. "Get out.
Hey!
Everyone needs to leave. Something's coming from the forest." People stared at her like she was insane. Some laughed. Others shook their heads and went back to their business. Nobody believed her. Why would they? Stories about Blackwood Forest were just local legends, entertainment for tourists, nothing real. But as the sun set that evening, the first shadows reached the edge of town. They slipped between buildings, crept through alleys, entered homes through open windows. The condemned had been imprisoned for so long they had forgotten what freedom tasted like, and they were hungry. The first victim was old Mrs. Patterson, who lived alone at the edge of town. Her neighbors found her the next morning, sitting in her rocking chair with her eyes wide open. She was not breathing. Her body was cold as ice. Her face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. By noon, 3 more bodies were found, all with the same symptoms. No visible wounds. No signs of struggle, just frozen faces and empty eyes. The town doctor, Dr. James Wright, could not explain it. "It's like their life force was simply drained away," he told the sheriff's department. "I've never seen anything like it." Sheriff Morrison knew better. He had heard the stories from his grandfather. He knew about the secret graveyard. He knew about the things that were buried there. And he knew that if Kelly's story was true, if the seal had been broken, then the entire town was in danger. He made a decision. Called the state police, the FBI, the National Guard. "We need an evacuation," he told them. "The whole town. Everyone needs to leave now." "On what grounds, Sheriff?" they asked. "Can't evacuate an entire town without a valid reason." "There's a chemical leak," Morrison lied, "from the old mine on the north side. Toxic gas, deadly. It's spreading through town. We have 4 dead already, maybe more by tonight." That got their attention. A chemical emergency, they understood. Ancient demons released from a cursed graveyard. They would not believe. Sometimes, Morrison thought, a useful lie is better than an impossible truth. By evening, evacuation notices were posted throughout town. Most people packed their bags and left willingly. Few stubborn residents refused, insisting it was all an overreaction. Those people would not survive the night. As darkness fell completely over Blackwood, the shadows grew bolder. They no longer hid in alleys and corners. They walked openly through the streets, searching for souls to consume. The town that had lived in ignorance for over a century was finally paying the price for the evil buried in its forest. And deep in the underground chamber, Detective Sarah Chen hung suspended in darkness. Her body drained, but her mind still conscious. Malthus kept her alive for a reason. She would be useful. Her determination, her stubbornness, her refusal to give up, those qualities would make her a perfect servant once the demon broke her spirit completely. "Sleep, detective," Malthus whispered into her mind. "Sleep and dream of the world that's coming, a world of darkness and despair, a world where I reign supreme." But Sarah refused to sleep. She refused to give in. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of resistance remained. She held on to it with everything she had.